Hi Year 12s. Today we're going to be looking at the first PowerPoint in the cells unit. We're going to be focusing on cell structure, which is unit 2.1 in the textbook, no matter which textbook you've chosen to use. We've got a little bit of a different structure for this PowerPoint. So for the first change, we've got the understandings from the biology syllabus that are going to be covered in this video and PowerPoint. Now there will only be one video for this PowerPoint. And the things that we're going to cover in this video are cell theory, the two different types of cells, so prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, the features that they have in common. We're going to compare prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells in response to size, organization, the shape, etc. We're going to look at the fact that prokaryotes can act as single cells, and we're going to talk about how eukaryotic cells can have specialized organelles. We're also going to be talking about the structure and describing the functions of nucleus, nucleolus, mitochondria, chloroplast, vacuole, Golgi body, endoplasmic reticulums, ribosome, lysosome, cytoskeleton, as well as comparing the structures of plant and animal cells. So this PowerPoint and video in general, this 2.1, is basically going to be the introduction to cells. So this is all probably information you've already talked about in previous years. A lot of this was covered in Year 11 if you've done Stage 1. So let's begin with the content itself. First off, cell theory. So the cell theory is a scientific theory that all cells adhere to. Now there are a few exceptions. You don't need to know about those exceptions for Year 12. In case you'd like to do some further research, a really good example of the exception to cell theory is striated muscle cells. So you can look that up and see why, but that's not really necessary for the curriculum at the time being. What is important though is cell theory states that all living things are made up of one or more cells. That all cells that are currently in existence are only so here because they have gone through cell division from pre-existing cells. So all cells have come from another cell. They don't just appear like that they've created. And lastly, that the cell is the unit of structure and function in all living things. So there are three key functions for cell theory. Let's talk about some actual cells though. So let's talk about the two major types of cells. The two major types of cells are prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. Consequently, we also have two main types of organisms. We have prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are just organisms that are made up of prokaryotic cells. They're generally always going to be single-celled organisms, whereas eukaryotes are made up of eukaryotic cells. Now, eukaryotes can be single-celled, but they can also be multiple-cell or multicellular as well. A lot of things that prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells have in common show us that there's actually a common evolutionary past. So what we actually believe is that prokaryotic cells evolved into eukaryotic cells. We'll talk that a lot more in one of the later units for cells. But basically what we believe is a larger prokaryotic cell engulfed a smaller prokaryotic cell. That smaller prokaryotic cell, rather than being digested by the larger cell, actually was kept inside the cell and functioned as a specialized component of that cell to help produce extra products. So for example, mitochondria and chloroplast are our main sources of evidence for this. Mitochondria and chloroplasts actually still have prokaryotic DNA inside them. They replicate the same way that a prokaryotic cell does. They don't get replicated through mitosis. They actually replicate via binary fission of their own time. That's called the endosymbiotic theory, and we'll talk about that later. What we want to talk about now is just the timelines. So first off, prokaryotic cells were first originated on Earth around 3.5 billion years ago. Eukaryotic cells, which are much more complex because they've got those membrane-bound organelles, originated around 2.7 billion years ago. So which tells us prokaryotics are obviously on Earth first, eukaryotics after. They're more complex. They're probably evolved from prokaryotics. But they have many common features. So for example, they all have cytoplasms. So both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have a cytoplasm. They both have a cell membrane. They both have ribosomes inside their cells to help create proteins that are needed in the cell. They have genetic information in the form of DNA, and they have amino acids in their cells to help produce proteins. The presence of all of those common features we often use as evidence of the fact that eukaryotes evolved from prokaryotic cells. Let's look at prokaryotic cells specifically. So, first off, prokaryotic cells are generally classified based on their shape. So, spherical prokaryotes are generally referred to as cocci, rod-shaped prokaryotes are called bacilli, and spiral-shaped prokaryotes are called spirilla. Now, prokaryotes have a lot less complex structure than eukaryotes, and that's because they don't have membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus. They don't have a nucleus inside them. What is unique to prokaryotic cells is they have a cell wall. That cell wall helps maintain the shape of the cell by giving structural support. They have a capsule which goes around the outside of the cell. It's almost like a covering for the cell that helps provide protection from host cells, because prokaryotes are generally something like bacteria or parasites, and when they get into our body, they try and take over. So our body's response would be to try and kill it off. That capsule helps protect the prokaryote. They have pili, which are little hairs coming from the outside of the cell. Just helps them to adhere to surfaces like other cells or other structures inside, etc. Some prokaryotes will have something called a flagella. A flagella is a thin whip-like structure that comes out the back of the cell, almost like a tail, that helps the prokaryote move. All prokaryotes have something called a nucleoid. A nucleoid is basically their version of a nucleus. It's not membrane bound or anything like that. It's just a region in the cytoplasm of the prokaryotic cell that the DNA is stored. They also have something called plasmids. Now, plasmids are small circular DNA. They don't make up the chromosomes of the cell. They're basically just extra DNA that has genes for metabolism, and they'll exchange the material in those plasmids with other prokaryotes. We've used that a lot in genetic engineering, which we talked about last topic. So you should know a little bit about plasmids. The other thing that's not on this slide that I will add into the information is prokaryotic cells' DNA, when their chromosomes are singular and circular. Okay, so prokaryotic cells are special in the fact that their DNA or chromosomes are singular and circular. We have a little bit of a diagram of a prokaryotic cell here. We can see our flagella, which is our thin whip-like structure. We've got our pili on the outsides used for adhesion. We've got the cytoplasm inside the cell. We've got the cell membrane on the inside of the cell wall. We've got our cell wall, which has been drawn a little bit thicker to represent the outside cell wall there. We have our ribosomes here. We have our DNA plasmid, which is our circular section of DNA that's not part of the chromosomes. And we have our DNA inside our nucleoid region. What's not undrawn on this diagram is there is no capsule, but the capsule would just be outside the entire body of the cell. Eukaryotic cells. So eukaryotic cells have membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus. Some of the important organelles that eukaryotic cells have are a nucleus, which is found in plant and animal cells. And basically the nucleus is the site of all genetic information. It's the site of transcription, which we talked about last topic. DNA replication, all of those are happening inside the nucleus. They have mitochondria. Mitochondria is, again, in plants and animal cells. And mitochondria is the site of respiration and the production of ATP, so adenosine triphosphate, basically our energy currency. Chloroplasts are only found in plant cells, and they're a light-absorbing organelle that is responsible for photosynthesis. Vacuoles are actually found in plant and animal cells. All the diagrams really only show that vacuoles are found in plants, but that's because they're a lot larger inside plant cells. They are actually found inside animal cells as well, but they're really, really small and often kept off of the diagrams. All that a vacuole does is they help store water and nutrients for the cell. Golgi body, again, these are found in plant and animal cells, and they help to package proteins into vesicles. We've got our endoplasmic reticulum, so there's two types of endoplasmic reticulum. Both of them are found in both plant and animal cells. So the rough endoplasmic reticulum is responsible for proteins, and it's rough because it's got ribosomes embedded into it. The smooth endoplasmic reticulum has no ribosomes, but it helps make phospholipids. Lysosomes are found only in animal cells. Lysosomes contain enzymes that will help digest old organelles or whole cells that are no longer needed. Lastly, we have our cytoskeleton, which is found in both plants and animals, and that's just a section of protein fibers that will help provide mechanical support during cell division. It also helps with movement of organelles throughout the body. we have two diagrams here as well. So on the left we have our animal cell. You can see there's a difference actually in even the way we're drawing these. So the animal cell only has our cell wall, cell membrane, not cell wall. And it has our rough endoplasmic reticulum with the ribosomes, smooth endoplasmic reticulum without ribosomes, nucleus, nucleolus, the cytoplasm, our mitochondria, our Golgi body, and the lysosome, which is specific to animal cells. Over in our plant cell, over here, on the right, same organelles, except now we have a cell wall as well. We've got the vacuole visibly drawn in here, quite large, and the only other difference here is the chloroplast down here, which is found only in plant cells, responsible for photosynthesis. So comparing prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So this is the last slide here. We've got to be able to compare the two. Prokaryotics and eukaryotic cells differ in size. So prokaryotic cells are much smaller, with only about 0.5 to 5 micrometers, whereas eukaryotic cells are 1 to 100 micrometers. So you can see there is a little bit of an overlap with some prokaryotes and eukaryotes, but generally prokaryotic cells are smaller. DNA is found in the nucleus of a eukaryotic cell, while it's found in the nucleoid of prokaryotic cells. Again, prokaryotic cells have one singular circular chromosome, whereas eukaryotic cells have multiple chromosomes and they're linear in nature. Prokaryotic cells contain no membrane organelles, but eukaryotic cells do contain many membrane-bound organelles. And lastly, prokaryotic cells are unicellular organisms, while eukaryotic cells, while some are unicellular, most are multicellular and are actually organised into different categories inside that cells and different specializations.